Good afternoon. And I just want to thank Lisa and everybody else that is here and the warm welcome I've received. It's really great to see a lot of you people here that are working so hard for public sector rights for workers and the like. And a lot of you already know my story. You know, I started work for the state of Illinois in 2007, and I was forced into paying these agency fees or union dues or whatever you want to call them. And it was something that I just really, was not comfortable with from the standpoint that nobody asked me as an individual, as a worker, what I wanted. They just assumed, and of course by state law in Illinois, I had to start paying this money. Well, if anybody has had something done in such a way that they don't agree with, at times I think you feel violated, and that's exactly what I did. But I was pretty powerless, really didn't know what to do and how to do it. But fortunately, I was able to meet the folks at Liberty Justice Center, who is a public interest law firm, and they were able to work with me, and Pat Hughes, our president, and Diana Reichert, who's our vice president, worked with me, had my back, and we put together a strategy. And as many of you know, we went all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, I'm just a guy working for the state in Illinois, and to think that I might get all the way to the Supreme Court and actually get the decision that we did was, quite frankly, very overwhelming. I mean, who could imagine, the little guy, making it that far? But it did happen, and I'm very proud of that fact, and I want to thank everybody here and across the nation for all the support that you folks have given me. Now, one of the things that we have to remember in a lot of this, is that the Supreme Court takes a long time. I mean, we filed our case in 2015. We didn't get a decision until last June. And so it took about 3 years, give or take. And by some standards, that was actually pretty quick. By others, it takes a long time. I mean, we're not talking Law and Order here where, it happens in an hour. It just doesn't work that way. But the thing that you have to remember is that when you go before the Supreme Court and you have your case announced by the Chief Justice, there's kind of like double goosebumps that happen. The hair stands up on the back of your neck, and you're thinking, oh my God, what have I done? And I think, as my mother told me when I mentioned when I told her at the point that we were going to go to the court, she said, Mark, you know what they did with Jimmy Hoffa? And that said, thanks, Mom. That's support. That really is. But, it was strictly overwhelming to go to the court. But what was also very, very interesting was when we went back for the decision. And so it was myself and John Tillman and Governor Rauner, and we're sitting in the courtroom on Monday. Yes, we're going to get a decision. Well, it didn't happen. Went back on Tuesday, same thing. Now I'm beginning to think I'm in a movie with Bill Murray and Groundhog Day. Same thing happening day after day. Went back the third day, decision day. And we go into the bailiff's office, and the bailiff says, oh, I know who you guys are. We didn't even have to present our credentials. Now that's scary. You've either been there too many times or the staff recognize you, and that's not good either. It's a good thing it wasn't a criminal case, or I'd really been in trouble. But we got our decision, but now we have a situation where we're finding there's a bunch of misinformation out there by the unions. They're telling people if you leave the union, you're going to lose your pension, you're going to lose your health care, you're going to lose your wages and benefits. They're all false, period. That's not going to happen, because where does that come from? It comes from your employer, not the union. But unfortunately, people are listening, and they just are not going out and getting the correct information. And that's why you folks and ALEC and all the other groups around the country are so important in order to get that message out to people and make sure that people know that they do have those rights. And there's a couple of people here, Senator Bob Onder, Senator Eichelberger, from Pennsylvania, that have tried to get some legislation going, which is very, very positive. And I think that's what we all need to do. If you were just in the session before this one, you've got some model legislation that you can work with. And I think that's going to be very important. But the important thing that I think we really have to keep in mind is that we've got to work together on all this. If we don't work together, where are we going to be able to overcome this amount of misinformation and all of this rhetoric that's just plain false, period? We've got to overcome that. And because there's an awful lot of people out there that were workers like myself, approximately 5 million when we filed the case, that didn't have the freedom, but now they do. And we've got to get that information out to them. We just have to. And that's my cause. That's why I joined Liberty Justice, and that's why I'm here speaking and going across the country in order to get that word out to people. And that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do. So I'd like to thank you, and I'd like to welcome Lisa back, and Brian Kelsey, who I've had the pleasure of working with now, because he's joined us.
Thank you, Mark. And what we wanted to do with this session was to give Mark an opportunity to kind of tell his story. And even though you've spoken at ALEC now twice, the audiences are very different. So I think for a lot of people here, just hearing his story is an important one. And I think the messages that he has talked about are really important with respect to us working together. The senators that Mark mentioned and the effort in Pennsylvania is something that we're all looking at, and I know Bill Bennett, who's going to be coming up here in a little while, will also speak to that. But we as a movement have joined our collective arms to recognize this misinformation and what Mark was speaking to, and to figure out how all of us, all of the liberty-minded organizations can work together and make sure that you in the states have the information and are armed with the information that you can use to make sure that that the workers know their rights. So Senator Kelsey has been working, and I want to bring you on up here. Senator Kelsey has been working with Mark on that education, and I'd love it if the two of you could have a little conversation just to kind of get the ball rolling. And I think this will provoke our other legislators to figuring out what they need to know so that they can do the right thing in the states. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Well, thank you, Lisa. Thank you for being here in the audience. And thank you, Mark, as well, for standing up for your constitutional rights and for the rights of so many others out there. I mean, this Janus decision was a huge win. In fact, it was the biggest win for workers' rights and workers' freedom in over a generation. We at the Liberty Justice Center, we knew what was at stake going into this case. You're talking about 5 million government workers in 22 different states that were violating the free speech rights of their workers. So how are they doing that? Prior to the decision, you had government workers who had to choose between either being a member of the union and paying those fees, or being forced by state laws that had been passed by state legislatures to pay what were called agency fees or fair share fees that could be as much as 75% or more of the regular union dues. So the Supreme Court ruled this summer that government workers who choose not to be a member of the government union have a right not to pay 1 dime to that union. We're talking about billions of dollars now in union fees that were being funneled to overt political operations that were lobbying state legislatures throughout the country. So this Janus ruling had a huge effect on agency fee payers like Mark. It also, however, has a big effect on current government union workers. Some of those are in your states right now. Mark and I just went out to California 2 weeks ago, and we had the pleasure to meet with a man named Tommy Few. And Tommy is a public school teacher in Los Angeles. Now, my wife and my mother were both public school teachers, and so I believe that there is a special place in heaven for those who are willing to teach our next generation. That is an extremely important job, and it's a hard job. Tommy is a special education teacher. There's an even greater place for those people. That is a hard job that is often a thankless job, and it really requires teachers who are dedicated toward their students. And Tommy Few is dedicated. He wants nothing more than to teach his students and to ensure that they learn what he's trying to teach them. What he doesn't want is to continue to pay union fees to an organization that is actively lobbying on behalf of political beliefs that he doesn't agree with. And so the Liberty Justice Center has worked with Tommy and has filed a lawsuit on his behalf because 3 separate times he tried to get out of the union. He wrote 3 separate letters. He even took the last letter and hand-delivered it to the union president. And still, the union told him, no, you can't get out. They said, we're only going to accept your resignation at a certain time window, which we determine, and only then, if you follow all these specific rules, will you be allowed to leave the union. That is wrong, and it is a violation of his First Amendment constitutional rights. That's why the Liberty Justice Center has filed this lawsuit on Tommy Few's behalf, and that's why we're going to file more lawsuits. Because, see, the problem is there are millions of union members who are out there, just like Tommy, and they have been given this unconstitutional choice. They can either join the union, pay the dues, or they were given a choice at the time that they joined in which they could buck the union, face intimidation from other members of the union or other coworkers, and yet still have to pay basically the same amount of money to that union. But the Supreme Court was very clear in Mark's case that you've got to have affirmative consent if you want to continue to deduct those dues. So the Liberty Justice Center has now talked to hundreds of workers across the country, and we are signing plaintiffs up in various states. We're in the process of filing lawsuits in multiple states that will require affirmative consent for union representation, that will strike down these opt-out windows, and that will return these unconstitutionally paid union dues. So if you know of workers in your state who need that help, please let us know. And let me take off my Liberty Justice Center hat for one moment as well and speak to you as a fellow state senator in Tennessee. And that is to say that we have a role in this process as well. State legislators need to be playing offense and defense. We need to be playing defense against state laws like the one in California that we're challenging currently. That law was passed directly to ensure that government workers would not have their Janus rights respected. In fact, it was signed into law on the very day that the Supreme Court ruled its Janus decision. We've got to be playing defense against these types of laws, but we also have to be playing offense. And that's where ALEC can be a huge help to us. They have drafted multiple model bills that are available for you, and 3 in particular I want to mention. One of them writes the Janus decision into state law. Anybody can use that. Senator John Eichelberger introduced that in Pennsylvania. Thank you for your hard work there. We also have laws for blue states that mirrors the litigation that says that these opt-out windows are unconstitutional. And then finally, another law for all states says that public unions have to follow the same rules that private unions have to follow in regards to certification. So these are things that we can do. So I just want to ask you again, as a state legislator, make sure that you are doing your part to ensure that this Janus decision actually gets implemented in the states. And with that, Mark Janus and I are happy to take your questions in regards to our work at the Liberty Justice Center, and also how we and you can partner together to help support worker rights. Thank you. And if you do have questions, please step up to the microphone. Yes. Or just yell it out.
I'm also a retired state corrections officer. I want to thank you, Mark, for what you've done. And if you would please just address, because having spent 20 years as a state employee in a couple different departments, the rank and file is not on board with these corporate bosses, and there are they are corporations, they're nonprofit corporations that have a monopoly. The rank and file truly are not on board. And Mark, I'd like to get your take on that and what you've received from other state employees and other government employees as you've been traveling around.
Well, what I've been finding is that there are a lot of people that don't agree with the unions, as you stated. But the problem is they don't know how to get out. And because if they go to their union steward or, their local, they're certainly not going to provide that information. So that's why we've got various websites, such as ours at Liberty Justice, standwithworkers.org, and there are others across the country that will help you with letters and the like. And that's why, I'm going out speaking anywhere I can get. I'm doing op-eds in publications across the country, just trying to let people know, because unfortunately the unions use that intimidation factor that I spoke of earlier, the misinformation that if you get out, you're going to lose your pension, et cetera, which is all false, and it's strictly an intimidation area. And the only way we're going to get this across the finish line, and it's going to take 3 to 5 years. It's not going to happen overnight. It's just going to just trying to get the message out, and that's all we can do. I know that here in Illinois, we're working on a number of things, and we're hoping to roll that out in the next couple of weeks. But also look at it from the standpoint that if you don't have to pay those union fees anymore and the like, what do you think that's going to do to the economy? If we add, that many dollars to the economy. For example, in California, the unions in California collect $2.7 million a day in dues. Take that times 300 plus days a year. Where do they need all that money just to do wages and benefits negotiations, collective bargaining?
Who else has a question? Yes.
Mr. Janus, you rock.
Oh, thank you.
And Brian, I wrote this down. Now that you are working for the Liberty Justice Center, what has been the biggest difference between working on the legislative side as a senator and now on litigation as a lawyer?
Well, that's a really good question. When you work as a state legislator, as many of you in this room know, you are enacting limited government, free market policies that you hope will be very helpful to people. And you hope that you will see that, but you're ultimately not a member of the executive branch of government, and it's not your responsibility to execute those laws and to see how they play out. But as a litigator, it is just a pleasure and a blessing to be able to represent real plaintiffs who have real stories and who need real help, who need it immediately. Mm-hmm. You don't always get it in the court system, but who need it immediately. And that has been, that's been the biggest difference, is being able to see that these are tangible people's lives who are at stake. These are tangible paychecks who are having money taken out of them unconstitutionally, and that's what we're protecting at the Liberty Justice Center. Over here.
Regarding the issue in California where the union was saying that you can only get out in a certain window, with this Janus ruling from a legal standpoint, can states, would this take precedent over any contract law that might exist with the union agreement, so that if say a state passed a law that said any employee can get out at any time by filling out this form or whatever the procedure is, that they could, and the contract law wouldn't interfere with that?
It is our position at the Liberty Justice Center that that any sort of agreements like that were entered into prior to this decision are unconstitutional now, because the choice was never a clear constitutional choice. Those workers were not given that option back at the time to simply opt out of the union and not pay any fees at all. And so that's why we are arguing in California and in all these other states that those agreements are unconstitutional on their face.
Yeah, one of the decisions was that you have to affirmatively declare that you want to be a member of the union. So part of the argument has been that as of the decision, everybody is out, unless you turn around and affirmatively declare that you want to be a member of the union. And there was also a sentence in the decision that said, you have to waive your First Amendment rights. And of course, the unions are pushing back on that very, very strongly.
I understand that there's a number of lawsuits going on in states. How long would we expect it will take to go through the process? Will it be faster now that Janus has gone through? And do you see any of those lawsuits working their way to the Supreme Court?
Oh, I think they will at some point. I mean, we've seen a number of them across the country that have been filed. Some are even in the process of trying to do class action. It's going to take a period of time, 3 to 5, maybe 6 years. We don't really know. It also is going to depend on, how many cases are filed, because at some point, I think there's going to be a tipping point where the unions just realize, look, we're spending too much money and we're fighting this too much. The other side that I like to point out is that they're spending all this money defending a lot of this. Wouldn't that money be better spent representing their membership and, offering what they can do conservatively and also beneficially for their members, instead of spending all this money on litigation and other things? And if individuals and let's say unions can convince individuals that it's a good thing to be a member of a union and a positive thing, then people would flock to it. Why would, prior to my decision, they have to force people into it? So that's another way to look at it.
Certainly this issue of affirmative consent is the most important phrase that Mark mentioned that came out of the ruling in his case. And that's an issue that's going to have to play out in multiple courts throughout the country. Certainly that issue is going to make its way up to the circuit court level, at the federal court level. And beyond that, certainly the Liberty Justice Center is prepared to continue to litigate those cases if it goes all the way back to the Supreme Court again.
Okay, thank you all very much, and thank you again for allowing me to be here to speak, and thank you again for all the hard work that you're doing across the country. I have to tell you that it's extremely intimidating when people say post-Janus. Okay, I'm here, I am alive, my heart's still beating, but thank you very much, I appreciate it.
So I do want to one more time just highlight that there are a number of issues that are available for you, and there are a number of ALEC model policies that are available through the CIED task force. And so please check those out. And thank you for those of you who came to our workshop earlier this morning. And another individual who is working on those issues is our next speaker, who is a former Secretary of Education and a man whom I told him that when I first saw him, I must confess, I was a few years younger. I was not quite a state senator, but I saw him on television, and in fact, I was still in high school at the time, but I was paying attention to what he said because everything that he said made perfect sense, and it seemed that it was perfectly logical, and yet it was not being followed by about half of America. And so, now he is working on these issues as well to continue to improve our education and to make sure that all of our educators, and in particular our state legislators who are working in this arena, can continue to have the years of his wisdom and advice. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Bill Bennett.